Well, welcome everyone. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Lee Freeman. I'm the library's public historian, local historian by day for the month of October. I am Father Dennis DeCourcy of St. Mary's Cistercian Abbey, or Deacon of Barnesdale, Under Sheriff of Forenza, and Adam Scatlock, who sells the Fondy Stale in each field. So, welcome to the second of our annual Renaissance Fair lecture series that we do to kick off the Renaissance Fair. So we've been doing this ever since, maybe all the way back to year one, but I know if not long after we started doing the Renaissance Fair, we started the lecture series because we wanted to tie the Renaissance Fair in with the curriculum in the city school. So that's why they picked October, because it was during the school year. Statistically, in 1987, it was one of the driest, warmest, temperate months of the year. Some years we haven't had that, but the teachers in the school system could tie their curriculum in with the Renaissance Fair. Medieval and Renaissance history, poetry, Shakespeare, stuff like that, the Arthurian romances. So these lectures are sponsored by the Alabama Renaissance Fair and the UNA History Department. So thanks to Dr. Ben Lowe of the History Department for organizing these and getting our speakers together. Last week, Dr. George McCoskey kicked us off with a great lecture with props. He brought some of his bows and crossbows. He talked about medieval hunting and poaching, which is very interesting, kind of hands-on. This week, let me talk about next week before I introduce this week's speaker. Next week, we will have Dr. Andrea Nate of the University of North Alabama Modern Foreign Language Department, doing a program with, I think, Rebecca Lynham, who teaches German, and some of the German students, so they've branched out slightly. They'll be doing a program titled Love and Death in the Medieval and Early Modern Hispanic and Germanic Worlds. So that should be really interesting. And these the speakers came up with some really great titles this year. And I always like to quote Kermit the Frog from that segment on the original Muppet Show where they would do the open forum, which they would discuss some intellectual topic, and it would usually devolve into Miss Piggy karate chopping the guest star. It's how they would raise the intellectual level of the program. So that's what we like to do at the Renaissance Fair. So it's not just a medieval fantasy fair, that we actually came grounded in history. So this week we are privileged to have Dr. Brenna Wardell of the University of North Alabama English Department. She is a friend of the Alabama Renaissance Fair. She always comes out in regard to making merry with us. Last year, I believe she dressed out to do her program. She's a friend of the library. Are you still doing that? I know for several years she did an online movie discussion.
No, we're not. Yeah. Although my colleague, Dr. Stephen Melvin, is doing 2 film podcasts. But yes, we're thinking about bringing out Film Club.
Because that was very popular. So if you've got a favorite movie, chances are Dr. Wardell has already discussed it, or maybe they will discuss it if they reboot the series. She will be doing a program today called Inside the Wooden O, The Material Magic of Shakespeare's Globe Theater. And I love the title. The title's been intriguing me ever since I've known about it. So I'm really interested to hear what she has to say. So please welcome Dr. Brenna Wardell of the University of North Alabama.
Thank you so much, Lee. Thank you guys, everyone, for coming today. It's a real pleasure to be here. And even if I'm not in my Renaissance garb today, I decided not to do that. So I've got a wonderful image here of Shakespeare's Globe Theater, and I'm going to be asking, towards the end of my presentation today, several of my former students for our study abroad trips who have attended the Globe to talk about their own experiences, because this is very much about the experience, the material experience of being at the Globe and what we can, as scholars and actors and lover of all things theater, what we can learn from this experience. So I wanted to start a little bit by, as I was doing, kind of discussing my title, not only because it gestures to the subject of my talk, Shakespeare's Globe Theater, but because it captures a central aspect of that theater and the magic it evokes, and that is the issue of imagination. So the quoted portion of my title, The Wooden O, comes from William Shakespeare's Henry V. which opens with a single actor, a chorus, coming out to address the audience. The chorus begins with the famous words, "Oh, for a muse of fire that would ascend the brightest heaven of invention, a kingdom for a stage, princes to act, and monarchs to behold the swelling scene." Wishing for a creative force to bring to life the vast array of characters, locations, and battles, and I'll just go ahead and, do the quote there. There we are. The play contains, the chorus acknowledges the challenges of conjuring such epic scenes within the limited capacity of the theater, asking the assembled spectators, can this cockpit hold the vasty fields of France? Or may we cram within this wooden O the very casques that did affright the air at Agincourt? Ultimately, the chorus insists that it is the power of the audience's imagination that will bring these wonders forth. And it is the wonders conjured within the magical space of the third version of the Globe Theatre, Shakespeare's Globe Theatre, that our 2024 UNA English Department Study Abroad students and I will address through a discussion of our experiences viewing the production of the tragedy of Richard III at the Globe. There are a number of other theatres in London in the Elizabethan period: the Theatre, the Rose, the Swan, the Fortune, and the Curtain. All are now lost to us. However, Shakespeare's Globe Theatre, the third incarnation of the Globe, offers us a potential model for these lost theatres. Through attending a show under its thatched roof, the only thatched roof allowed in London because of the dangers of fire, amidst its timber, lime-washed walls, we can time travel, if only imperfectly, to the Elizabethan period to gain a greater understanding of the nature of these lost structures and the playing practices and audiences within them. I'm going to begin by discussing the origins of theatre structures, both outside and inside England, move to some background on the three iterations of the Globe Theatre, and then transition to what we learned from our experiences at Shakespeare's Globe Theatre. And again, I'll be inviting my former students to come up and talk about that. So I'm going to start a little bit with the kind of theatres that sort of set us up for the Globe Theatre. And these are the theatres of the ancient world, particularly the theatre of ancient Greece. So the image you see on the left there is the Theatre of Dionysus. That is the famous theater in Athens, Greece, and it is a good model for the nature of ancient Greek theater. So you see the actual theater there on the left, and then some reconstructions of what it would have looked like in other theaters of that period in their entirety. So Greek theater actually has some really interesting connections to the sort of outdoor theater that we see in Shakespeare's period. One is that they are outdoor, so of course our spectators are subject to the elements. In both theaters, both men and women could attend, but in both kinds of theaters, only men could act. Women were not allowed on the stage. We also see the figure of the chorus. Now, of course, the chorus functions differently within Greek theater than it does in the Elizabethan theater. In Greek theater, we have a large mass of people representing the citizens. So, for example, in the play Lysistrata, wonderful comedy by Aristophanes, they're representing the men and women of Athens, and they're speaking about sort of the positive and negatives about what the character of Lysistrata is proposing, which of course is a sex strike to stop a war. Within, of course, Elizabethan theater, the figure of the chorus in Henry V is just one person, kind of representing everyone, as well as sort of the author's voice, but standing in a very different mode. Another difference, of course, is that while the Elizabethan theater actors use their actual faces, in the Greek drama, they were masked. But that idea of wearing masks, of performance itself, and kind of performance on top of performance, which we see in theater, is something that we could see as a close connection between the two. Now, Greek theaters could hold a great number of people. So apparently the Theatre of Dionysus, again, kind of going back to take a look at it there on the left, that could hold up to 17,000 people. whereas the Elizabethan theaters were smaller. There are estimates that the Globe Theatre would have held about 3,000 people at capacity. Now, of course, Shakespeare's Globe Theatre holds a lot less than that because of modern fire regulations and other restrictions as far as how many people you can crowd together. So these were vast structures that would assemble large numbers of people. Let's see, anything else I wanted to say about them? Oh, and the shape, of course. The circular shape is, of course, very much anticipating the circular shape that we see for the outdoor Elizabethan theaters. Though not all of them. We have this image of the round, actually, 20-sided polygon features of the Globe Theatre, but in reality, some of those Elizabethan theatres were actually rectangular. I believe the curtain is one of those exceptions. But this is an image of what the ancient Greek theatre would have looked like, and you're going to see a lot of these elements represented in our Elizabethan theatres like the Globe. So the skene right here at the back, this becomes the two layers, the kind of the ground and the balcony, and then above that, within our Elizabethan stage, we'll see the heavens. And this area right down here, the orchestra and altar, is where we're going to see our groundlings standing in the yard of the Elizabethan Theatre. And my students got to be groundlings. I have retired from being a groundling because I have old legs. So they can tell you that experience. And one of the beauties of that, and something you don't see in the Greek theatre, is the ability to get really, really close to the actors. If the actors are spitting as they speak, you're going to experience that. If they are playing, as in the case of Richard III this summer, trying to corrupt the audience members, you're going to get that directly as you are attending the show. So it's a very intimate, even despite the large size, and particularly, of course, in the Elizabethan theatre. And this is kind of just a wonderful mosaic that gives you a little bit of a sense of what it would have been like. These are a group of performers. You can see musicians, dancers, and of course they've got their massive comedy and tragedy there. So again, some similarities between this theatre and our Elizabethan theatre. Another important influence that we should think about is the influence of medieval theatre in England. And there are two primary kinds of theatre in this period, in this long medieval period. We have the mystery plays and the morality plays. So the mystery plays are originally tableaux that are performed in churches. And the reason to perform them is because, of course, the majority of the population cannot read or write. And when they go to the church for a service, those services are in Latin, which of course is not something that most common people, the majority of people, can understand. So these plays, both the mystery and the morality plays, are in the vernacular. So people would be easily able to understand them and the messages that are conveyed by them. So the mystery plays start in cathedrals or other churches, but eventually over time they move into the streets of the city. York, Chester, many of the large medieval cities. And a few of the cities still have their old mystery play cycles. In fact, when I was in Chester a couple of years ago, I went to the beautiful Chester Cathedral, one of the best cathedrals you can go to. And they were setting up for a mystery play. And they'd actually brought it back into the church, and they had this very, very huge, elaborate tableau that they were setting up. I wish I could have seen it. It was exciting. So these were performed, the mystery plays, by members of the community, particularly by members of the guilds. Right? So the Guild of Carpenter might do the crucifixion of the Christ figure. The Guild of Bakers might perform the section of Jesus in the Last Supper. So they would perform these scenes from the Bible or other spiritual texts as a way to inform people about spiritual matters. Now, this continues from the 12th century onwards, but in the 15th century, we see these being replaced by what were called the morality plays. And I've just finished teaching one of the great morality plays, Everyman, to my Brit Lit 1 students. The morality plays are original. So this is taking us into the realm of Shakespeare, where writers are certainly borrowing from other writers or from myths or from existing texts, but are also writing original material. So morality plays take us in that direction. And while, again, the mystery plays are performed either in churches or on the streets, the morality plays are often performed in early innyards. So I'm going to give you kind of a sense. So this is an image of a mystery play being performed. So here you can see kind of an element of one of the large cities. So they've got this wonderful rolling cart, and they're performing a scene or scenes for the people there. And of course, the people, as you can see, can get very, very close to the performers of this scene from a mystery play. And there's a contemporary example. This is from the York Mystery Play Cycle. And then this is a drawing for a staging of a morality play. So the morality plays could be performed in spaces like this. This is the George Inn, which I got to go to for the first time this summer. It's wonderful. It's an old galleried inn. And this is what, if you had gone around England in this period, you would have seen the beginnings of these kind of inns that would have these sort of multi-layered playing structures with kind of a yard in between the buildings, and this would be a perfect place for a group of people to assemble to watch a show. So this is kind of the space that people would assemble for one of the morality plays. This is an example of the Castle of Perseverance, one of the early morality plays. And you can see it could be staged also in a large field or other area close to a town or a city, with the audience kind of around the performers, and with characters such as the vice figure moving through this area, working to tempt the audience to naughtiness. Okay, so now we reach the Elizabethan period. So now we are coming to the period of the Globe. So Elizabethan society is a highly visual and oral culture. So much so, as far as the oral nature, that people would say they weren't going to see a play, they were going to hear a play. That's why the language of Shakespeare is so vivid, so liable to catch your attention, because he's working on those ears. So theater, music, portraits, parades and processions, both religious and political, all these things, fairs, thinking about the Renaissance fair. In fact, the Bartholomew's Fair ran from the 12th century all the way to the 19th century and was finally closed for concerns regarding immorality. But so Elizabethan society, the theater of it, is coming out of this really, really rich, very sort of communal culture. It's also coming about because people have this idea that theater is actually a way of thinking about life, right? How do you understand the nature of being a human being in the world? You go to the theater. And you see all these different characters, these different types, both good and evil, and the reality, both good and evil within one human being, represented on stage, right? You see age, you see youth. And of course, the famous example of this was Shakespeare kind of in a meta way thinking about this is the 7 Ages of Man speech from As You Like It, one of the great comedies, where he says, all the world's a stage, and the men and women merely players. They have their exits and their entrances, and one man in his time plays many parts, his acts being 7 ages. So again, kind of thinking about life as a form of performance. So starting in the mid to late 16th century, we start to have the beginnings of actual permanent theaters being set up, as opposed to kind of these temporary carts, as you saw in the mystery plays, or setting up in an inn or a field, as in the morality plays. So the Red Lion in Whitechapel, 1567, this only lasts for like a summer. It's just a very short-lived venture, but it shows that there is a hunger within the vast city of London for these permanent theater playing spaces. Then in 1576, we have the creation of the theater in Shoreditch. And this is built by James Burbage. He is the father of the famous actor Richard Burbage, who will go on to premiere roles like Hamlet and Othello, some of the great Shakespearean roles. And of course, he was a member of Shakespeare's company. So James Burbage was the brother-in-law of the gentleman who started the Red Lion, and he obviously thought that there was a hunger for this, there would be an audience. And indeed there was, right? So not long after the theater opens, the curtain opens, then the Rose, then the Swan, and then the Globe Theater is built in 1599. It's actually built out of the timbers from the theater. Because what happened was, even though James Burbage constructed the theater, it was on land that was leased. And the landlord basically said, hey, I'm raising the rent. You're going to have to pay a ton more for this. And Burbage and the members of the Lord Chamberlain's men, probably including Shakespeare himself, dissembled in the dead of night the theater, moved it to a storage center, and then when summer came and building was good, they constructed the Globe Theater. So the Globe is actually part of it, is the ancient theater from 1576. And this is a drawing, not of the Globe, but of the Swan. We really have very little evidence of what these theaters were like. So this is one of the great resources that people have. So this is the Swan Theater. This is a rehearsal, not a performance, so you don't see much in the way of audience. You see the musicians up here, you see the actors on the stage, and then of course this is the area where the groundlings, the people who pay the least money because they're standing, would be positioned here, and then the audience in the galleries right there. And when Johann de Witt came, he was really impressed by the theater space, particularly by the painted columns. And in fact, when trying to reproduce these columns for the current Globe Theatre, they use these 400-year-old oak trees. They've got one of them from England and one from Scotland, these massive, because these are carved, these are actually an entire tree, basically. They would take the tree and then they would carve it to create these wonderful columns. Now, the theaters, of course, are located outside the city proper. And that is because the city officials thought that theater and theater going, right, the actors were there, the playwrights, and the audiences were a little naughty, right? That they were spending all their time going to the theater, they weren't working, they weren't behaving themselves, so this was a problem. So most of them are represented outside the city, right? Either to the north, right here, or in the case of the Globe and many of the other theaters, to the south in this area called Southwark, right here across the River Thames. And this was kind of the entertainment mecca. This was a little bit like kind of the Las Vegas of London. This is where all the good and naughty stuff was happening. So you have the Bear and the Bull Gardens, where sadly animals were being baited for sport. You had pubs of various kinds. You had brothels, and you had the playhouses, including the Rose and the Globe. So they're located right there. Elizabethan theater going was incredibly popular. Tons of people went, right? So 10% of them would go on a weekly basis, which meant that you had to change over the shows on a very, very regular basis so that people could see something new, right? And they would run up a flag letting people know whether it was going to be a comedy, a history, or a tragedy. So people would look across the city and they would see the flag. Oh, it's a comedy. I'm definitely going today. Right? There were no bathrooms for the 3,000 patrons, so people just had to kind of take potluck there. The performances were in broad daylight. Now, this is one of the significant differences between the first and second Globe Theatres and the current Shakespeare's Globe Theatre, because, of course, they use artificial light, so you can go to an evening show, as we did for Richard III. That would not have been the case, so, of course, daylight is the only light in this period. So there would be afternoon performances, so again, kind of during the workday. So you can see a little bit why the city fathers might be a little upset about this. Open to the weather. We were in luck this summer. It was actually quite cool for our evening performance, but of course it can get very hot. And of course, being England, it rains a lot. So particularly if you're a groundling and you're standing right here, you're not in the covered galleries, you are going to be very subject to the elements. Elizabethan theatre audiences could be pretty frisky. They would talk back to the actors. They would be very much sort of angling to be seen by other folks in the audience, and they might even throw things at the actors. So there is a disadvantage for an actor having everyone, including the groundlings, quite so close, that things could get a little interesting. As you can notice here, there's not elaborate scenery, right? So this is not the world of the West End where you have like the chandelier swooping down in Phantom of the Opera, or the helicopter in Miss Saigon, or any of the kind of elaborate special effects that you often get in the big theaters now. So the scenery story is very minimal. However, the actors would wear very opulent, wonderful costumes, and of course the language itself would paint a picture in your mind. So this is just a little bit more in the way of the details. I love this image because it gives you a sense of what it would be like to be, as my students were, a groundling, to be looking up through the open section right here, kind of the wonder of being in this amazing theatrical space. So this again is another image of what it might have looked like in Shakespeare's day. So you can kind of see the cutout right here. So the performers getting ready here, the musicians up in the gallery. Traditionally, of course, a trapdoor right here. So this would be where you would send characters to hell. So when I teach Dr. Faustus by Christopher Marlowe to my students a little bit later in the term, we'll be talking about the devils and the other folks of the netherworld. And when Faustus himself, of course, spoiler alert, is dragged to hell at the end of the play, that would be through a trapdoor in the stage. And then in contrast, this area up here would represent the heavens. And in fact, the ceiling right here is beautifully painted to represent the night sky and all of kind of the images of the beautiful kind of celestial world up above. So this again is the shape, right? As I mentioned, it's a 20-sided polygon. And they initially thought it was 24-sided, but by actually finding the foundation of the globe and the rose, they've been able to get a much better sense of the actual nature of the structure of the building. So this is an image, this would be the second Globe Theater, because of course the first Globe Theater, what happens to it? Does anyone remember? Yes, Bethany is right. It burns. It burns because they had cannon fire within a production of Shakespeare's Henry VIII, and that caught the thatched roof, and it went up. Luckily, the only victim was somebody's breeches, basically their pants. They caught on fire, but someone had a mug of ale handy and took care of that. So everything was good. So this image shows you again the environs of Southwark, you know, all the kind of naughty fun area in the south of the River Thames. Now this is actually mislabeled. He corrected this in later versions of this image. So this is actually the globe right here, and this is actually the bear baiting pit right there. So a little bit distance from the water right there. And the globe, today's Globe Theater is very close to the original location of the Globe Theater. And this is just a little breakdown time-wise, just to kind of think about that. So the Globe is constructed in 1599. It burns in 1613. A year later, they reconstruct it. Everything's good. However, who comes to power? The Puritans. And not only do they cancel Christmas and try and restrict all sorts of sports, but they also say no to theaters. So in 1642, the second Globe Theater is closed, and then in 1644, it is bulldozed. Well, the Renaissance version of bulldozing. However, in the 1970s, its fortune changes. So the actor Sam Wanamaker, he is American, but he spends a lot of time in Britain. He ends up settling there and performing, and he looks at many of the American theaters that are modeled on the globe, right? So if you've been to the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, the Angus Balmer, if you've been to San Diego, the Old Globe Theater, so there's a number of American theaters that actually try in various ways to reproduce the globe. So he thought, well, why are there none here in the UK? So he sets up this trust, he gets millions of dollars going. It takes years and years, but finally in 1993, construction starts. Sadly, too late for Sam Wanamaker, he dies that year. But in 1997, it is finished and open to the public, and a very, very popular venue. So there's a lot of similarities and differences between the original Globe Theaters, both the first and second iteration, and the one that we can go to today. So both of them use these timbers, right? So timber frame, wonderful timber frame, and a thatched roof. And I love this image here of working on the thatched roof. And again, special permission had to be given because after the Great Fire in 1666, the city father said no more thatched roofs. Right? They look very evocative, but no to them. But of course, it has an elaborate sprinkler system, as you would imagine. They used wooden pegs, not nails. And if you go there, you can see these wonderful wooden pegs right here. And apparently, the carpenters who were working on it were so in love with this building because they had this opportunity to actually use these ancient practices for building. And they were so excited to try this. I mean, this was something that was very old, but was new to them. So you can see in this image here just how authentic they were trying to be. Here is Sam Wanamaker with one of the trees that was being felled for the wonderful timbers of the Globe Theatre. So they used green oak, they used thatch, plaster, whitewash plaster. We still have the groundling standing in the open yard, in the open area before the stage. The other seating in the galleries is on benches. Though you can, just as in Shakespeare's day, buy a cushion to make it more comfortable. And of course, you can get food or drink in the theater. The stairs and other entrances and exits are much larger than they would have been in Shakespeare's time, again, for kind of modern fire regulations. And they did use scaffolding, cranes, other kind of modern construction techniques for the building. Now, this is a pretty adventurous thing for Sam Wanamaker to be thinking about in the 1970s, because in the 1970s, this was kind of the idea of what theater was. This was a very experimental production of A Midsummer Night's Dream by the famous director Peter Brook, just died a couple years ago. And this was seen as really experimental and avant-garde in the period, these white and black box theaters. So it was very kind of both looking back to the past and looking to something really different, experimental, creating the Globe Theatre, right? Old-fashioned in the sense they're going back hundreds of years to the Elizabethan period, but also experimental because people in the 1970s, 1980s, 1990s had never experienced an Elizabethan theatre. What would be discovered by having this new theatre space? And these are just some wonderful close-ups. Here you can see the heavens right here, the beautiful painted ceiling of the roof that goes over the playing area. Here you can see the massive columns, and then this is the gallery that can be used for both musicians and for performers. Now, as far as acting for the theater, it has really transformed actors' experiences. It's a very different kind of space to work in than, again, like something like the White Box Theater I showed you for A Midsummer Night's Dream. This is an image of an actor called James Garnon. He has done more Globe shows than anyone else, so he's a pretty good authority on what it's like to perform in this space. And I'll just read you what he says about it for those folks who can't hear. He said, "The acoustic is very, very true. It's like any wooden instrument. It requires subtlety and delicacy. If you just attack it, you destroy the sound. You've got to tease the music out of it." And I love this idea of it being like a large violin or cello, right? That you're trying to kind of find this way to find the music of the space. We spoke to an actor this summer. She's actually going to be coming this fall as part of the Actors from the London Stage. Her name is Sarah, and she was one of the actors in Richard III. And she said that there's a point, and we didn't quite winkle out exactly where it was on stage, but there's a point if you stand on the stage, you don't have to worry about projecting at all. You can be heard, even if you're just talking in normal kind of voice, you can be heard just because of the acoustics of the building, right, and how it captures the human voice. So that just gives you a little bit of a sense of performing there. And then this is a performance in Renaissance dress. And then as far as writing for it, I love this quote from a character in a play of kind of the period in which Shakespeare is writing. So he says, "Every poet must govern his pen according to the capacity of the stage he writes to, both in the actor and the auditor." Right? So, of course, playwrights of the period are thinking about the actors that they have on hand, right? What can they do? What are their capacity for comedy, tragedy, for different kinds of roles? But they're also thinking about the kind of space. Is it small? Is it large, right? Does it have this kind of wonderful sound that a theater like the Globe would have had, right? How will my language sound with it? One of the writers who's writing for Shakespeare's Globe Theatre talks about the need to honor the audience with a great deal of intelligence because they're an equal in the space with you. And I think, for both playwrights and for actors, you are constantly reminded of how equal you are because simply the physical proximity of the audience. If you're working on a traditional kind of proscenium stage, right? You're lighted, the audience is in darkness. They're separated from you, you're here on stage. You usually don't break the fourth wall and address them. And that is very different in a space like this. So this is quite transformative for all areas of kind of the theatrical craft. And this is Stanley Wells, one of the great Shakespeare scholars, talking about the nature of Shakespeare's understanding of his actors and of the space he's using, right? Shakespeare knows how many actors are available, how long it will take for them to change from one costume to another, right? So how long they have to go back to that tiring area behind, right, the stage, get dressed, change, come back on a new character, and how many of them will be boys and how much doubling he can impose. So Shakespeare would have known how this theater would shape his performances. Oops, sorry, getting right. Now this is the production we saw this summer. It was a really interesting, it's like no other production of Richard III that I have seen, because in a neat kind of inversion of the tradition within the Elizabethan period of having men play all the roles, right, including young women such as Juliet, here the entire cast was female or non-binary. And in fact, the actor playing Richard, Michelle Terry, is actually the artistic director of the Globe Theatre as well as a performer. So we had a wide variety of actors in a wide variety of costumes. So there was a wonderful kind of melding of the contemporary and the Elizabethan, into Jacobean elements in their costumes. And this gives you a little sense of kind of the stage itself as well. And as my students will attest to, when you're at the Globe, particularly if you're a groundling, you are right there to interact with the audience. Particularly powerful in a play like Richard III, where so much of it is this wonderful direct address of the character to the audience, bringing you in his conspiracies, letting you know his desires. Aren't we all going to have wicked fun together? Right, so we get that really clear sense from the performance space. Okay, I'm going to talk just for a second about some of my students who couldn't be here and wanted to be here, so we're kind of virtually here through these experiences, and then I'm going to invite my students up to talk about it. So a number of my students had never been to the Globe Theatre before. This was their first time. And I just sort of highlighted a little bit of their experience that I thought would be particularly interesting to you. So in the case of the first student, she's an undergraduate. She's actually a fashion major. So she's not an English major, but she was really interested in theater and performance and, of course, particularly costumes. And she said that the Globe was bigger than I expected. I had no idea people had to stand to watch, right? So she got to be a groundling and experience that. And she said, I think plays performed at the Globe are a lot more special, because I'd asked them how it compares to other theaters. Maybe they've been to theaters at the UNA campus or other places. And she says, a lot more special as they have to utilize what was available. I liked how they made certain parts of the stage to project their voices, so she's thinking about the acoustic element, and convey the purpose of a scene. And then the second student, another undergraduate, also new to the Globe, said, I was surprised that the Globe had so many trap doors. And of course, in this production, there's a lot of people dying. A lot of people being executed, and in fact, it became kind of almost a running joke in a very macabre way. People being marched off to the trapdoor, sent down the trapdoor to their deaths. So she said, I was surprised that the Globe had so many trapdoors as well as a place for a live band. So we had a wonderful live band playing original music that was very kind of raucous and celebratory, which was both, for Richard's like Rise to Triumph, very appropriate, but also very discordant at times when horrible things were happening on stage. I also did not expect the actors to walk off the stage and interact so closely with the audience. So here again, we're getting that close sense of the relationship between actors and performers. And she said, I felt like I was truly there as part of the performance. I was included in a way I have not been when attending plays at other venues. The Globe was designed with acoustics and lighting in mind, which would have been ideal in a time without electricity. The open roof means that there was a chance it might rain on the actors in the audience, but that would only add to the excitement. So here, she's kind of thinking about the ways that particular, what we could say is maybe the limitations of the Globe could also become a real strength, right? Because they would create this sort of very sort of vital, in the moment, oh, wait, it's it's snowing or it's raining, and I'm experiencing that right now as I'm experiencing this play. And then finally, this is one of our graduate students. She talks about how memorable it was being so close, how she felt transported back in time. She's a historian, so this was particularly interested to her to have this sort of material sense of history. And she said that at the Globe, the actors use the audience space to enter-exit the production. So again, this really close interchange between the actors and the audience. All right, and here is our group assembled before the production of Richard III, right, outside the Globe, which is right by the River Thames. And then here is our group visiting. So here are our groundlings sitting because it's intermission. You're not allowed to sit during the show. So here they are sitting, taking a break. Here they are standing. I try not to take any pictures during the production itself. You're not supposed to, but I did take these from my seat in the gallery with my old legs of our students relaxing right here. So I'm going to bring up two of our students from past years. So Charles Stutz and Bethany Howard are going to come and join me up here and talk a little bit about the experience, right? Thinking about what we can learn by going into a space like the Globe Theater. So come on up, Bethany and Charles. Yeah. Bethany, do you want to start? So Bethany didn't come this summer. She didn't get to see the production of Richard III, but she did get to see another production. And so, yeah, do you want to talk a little bit about it, Bethany?
Sure. I saw Comedy of Errors, and I love the comedy, so that was perfect for me. And I had my fingers crossed, like, please let it be Renaissance dress, please. I want it to be authentic, and it was, and it was so beautiful. Ever since I was 14 and I read Romeo and Juliet in high school, and we got to the end of the play, and of course I'm a 14-year-old emotional girl in tears, and I see these photos of the Globe, and I see the monument to Shakespeare in Westminster Abbey, and I think, I have to go there someday. And I got to, and it was so beautiful. And I got to be a groundling, and I'm an older student, okay? I have old legs, but I had to do it. I said, I have to do this once in my life. And just standing there and, you know, as close to the actors as we are. And it was so spectacular and so interactive. I was surprised at that as well, just how interactive. And in a comedy, that's quite fun. And as Dr. Wardell said, the entrances and exits, you know, where sometimes through the audience, there's the actor right by you. And I was just quite excited to see that. I was surprised also how large. I was imagining it smaller too for some reason, but it was a beautiful experience. And even though it was a comedy, I was just crying at the end. I was so excited to be there and just to experience something so beautiful and so historic. You know, you don't get to do that every day. You don't get to think back to Renaissance theater every day. It's not something that just happens. It's very special, and every production is special because the audience is going to interact differently each time, and it was just very, very exciting. Everyone should do it once in their life, or more than once. So.
Oh, thank you so much, Bethany. Charles. Now, Charles was here, as you can see, this summer, previous slide, and so you can talk about both the Globe itself and the production of Richard III, what it was like.
Absolutely. Yeah, going around with Bethany there. So I have been twice. Fun both times. But yeah, I'm probably one of the few people who thought the Globe was smaller than I expected, because mostly just because I guess from my background, like performing music and stuff, when it comes to historic theaters, you know, I'm usually expecting some big grandiose thing. Not to mention Shakespeare, one of the biggest names in literature and plays. I was expecting a bigger theater, but very nice, very well, like the quote from the actor said, it does feel a lot more smaller than like what it is. So that was quite enjoyable. Yeah, for both the productions, it is very jarring when you're used to the what we're used to for performances, where it's that huge disconnect, the actors coming down and interacting with the audience. Yeah, and now this time I was with Dr. Wardell in the gallery, so I wasn't in the crowd to see the different actors in these political style, just trying to rouse the audience, trying to get them on their side directly. And so, yeah, very, very lively. It definitely feels very personal, very real whenever you are that close to those kinds of performances. Any other questions or things to?
Well, we can actually open it up to our audience here, if you don't mind. You and Bethany can address some questions along with me. Yeah, I mean, to me, there's just something really profound about being in that physical space. I mean, you can smell it. You can smell the wood. You can smell a little bit of the thatch. Bethany, yeah, you can smell the river. Yeah, you can smell the food that are being, there's restaurants nearby, and then of course there's food at the Globe too. You can smell the food, right? It probably smells a lot better than it did in Shakespeare's day. We probably all smell a little bit better than we did in Shakespeare's day, but it's still like, when you think about kind of engaging your senses as well as your imagination, it's a really ideal spot for doing that, because again, it's not, it's not completely authentic, but it gives you at least some kind of whisper of what it would have been like. And Bethany, you had this wonderful evocative image that you had mentioned about, well, do you want to say it?
What do you mean?
About the plane.
Oh, of course. When I was seeing the production that I saw in 2023, we were kind of waiting for the show to start, and we're, standing there being groundlings, and I just look up and there's a plane. And I think, what a time to be alive, because I'm at the Globe, but it's modern day London and there are airplanes overhead. And it was just so beautiful to think that, we still care about this. We still care about Renaissance and Jacobean theater because it still resonates with us. And even if you're not a literary, sort of person, you still, know what this is. You've heard of it, you've seen it, you've read it in school. I read it for fun as well because I'm a dork and I love it. It was almost, I don't even know how to explain it, almost an out-of-body experience to stand right there on that stage and watch a plane overhead. And I just thought, this is the best day of my life.
Well, let's open it up for questions, and if you don't mind hanging out, Bethany and Charles. Yeah, questions for anyone? Yes.
In addition to the performances, do they give tours of the theaters?
They do. They do, yes. We did a tour with our 2019 group, unfortunately, and a workshop. You can actually do workshops with the actors, which is really wonderful. Unfortunately, this summer we looked into it and it was too spendy. They'd almost doubled their prices. So we're like, we'll do a performance, because the to be a groundling only costs £5 to £10, so about $7 to $13. So it's very, very affordable. And usually you don't have to book those in advance. You can, because it's a very large area, you can usually walk in. Well, maybe not necessarily always for like a hit show, but definitely it's relatively accessible that way. Yes. Yeah. Yes, question.
Well, in America, we can hardly wait to have a crowd so the entrepreneurs can hawk their hot dogs. Is any of that commercialized stuff going on?
No, not really. I mean, they have an amazing gift shop. I mean, all of these places,
During the performance.
No, during the performance, they actually don't do that. You can go outside, just outside the theater. They've got, like a concessions area, but they don't do like ye authentic Elizabethan turkey leg, or ye pot of ale, or anything like that.
I know that.
Well, they have modern day snacks. We had ice creams that were delicious. They have various beverages. I've perhaps had a hard cider there once before, excellent things, but no, that was one of the things when I heard that they were doing the recreation of the Globe years ago, when I heard this was happening, I thought, maybe it's going to be a bit twee, a bit kitsch, but I think it's because of the authenticity. It's that kind of spirit that the Carpenters had, in creating it. It's the sense that, yeah, we're going to use some modern materials. We're, of course, going to nod to safety, but we're going to try to kind of capture the essence as much as possible. So I think it does a pretty good job of kind of bridging, yes, we're going to make some money, we're going to be as authentic and as thoughtful as possible. And what did you guys think?
I agree. I think so. I mean, while you're at the play, there's no, they're not going around selling like at a ball game,
Yeah.
But if you wanted, you could go outside for a snack. Or if you want the cushion was pretty cheap though.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
So,
definitely get the cushion. Those benches are hard.
the gift shop is where you'll spend money.
Oh, they do have. I mean, I'm always lured by a good tea towel, a good T-shirt. I mean, again, we're nerds. We're lit nerds. So, and they're very good at trapping us with that. But they're excellent gifts.
Well, the Brits think we're backwoodsmen anyway. So.
Yes.
I may have missed this, but in Shakespeare's time, how frequently were performances held?
They would have been held. Oh, that's something I forgot to include in the slide. They would have been held, I believe, every day except for Sunday. So they would have been held multiple times a week. And they would, I think, only have one performance a day simply because of the issue of daylight hours, because they were restricted to that time. But they would rotate plays a lot. So whereas now, we think of a successful Broadway show has to run for at least a year, 2, 3, 4 years, a successful run would be much shorter than that, right? If you had, say, 10 performances, that would often be a success. And they would rotate both new and old productions. So, Shakespeare was constantly writing new stuff for the company so that, more punters could come in, but they would recycle older things. So they might go back to Thomas Kyd's The Spanish Tragedy, or let's put on a Christopher Marlowe, or whoever they had access to, because there was this deep, deep hunger. And people would go, multiple times a week. Again, which is what got the city fathers so upset. That here's everyone off to the theater again. Yes, Lee?
I'm intrigued by this idea that for most of the medieval period, professional actors, so to speak, were considered little better than thieves.
Oh yeah, they're good.
Unsuitable for women. So did Shakespeare and these theaters sort of help make theater respectable and acting respectable?
They did, yes. And part of that is through the patronage system. So if you were a writer in this period, you would often, this is before copyright. So you couldn't make a living as a writer except by either having your work performed, like Shakespeare did, or gaining patronage, which he also did. So you have like a wealthy noble person, be your patron, and you might write things in praise of them, and they might help to fund your operations. So this is why Shakespeare's company was called initially the Lord Chamberlain's Men, because the Lord Chamberlain gave them patronage, and then they were the King's Men when James came to the throne, because then they got the ultimate in patronage, the king. So yes, you would, through this kind of aristocratic sort of blessing, this is one of the ways that actors became more respectable. And you see actors like Shakespeare or Edward Allen, who is working for one of the other rival playing companies, not only become very financially secure, because people like Shakespeare were also, as well as actors and playwrights, they were sharers in the company. So they had a stake, a financial stake in the company. But they would then do charity, they would buy houses in their hometowns. So they were seen as respectable middle-class people. So that is the beginning kind of a transition from seeing actors as vagrants, as prostitutes, as scoundrels, to starting to see them as people that you would accept or even emulate. And that starts to happen in this period. Of course, there's a great deal of anxiety about that, and that is one of the reasons, of course, why the Puritans decide to close the theaters, not only because people are being distracted by the delights and wickedness therein, but because you have performers who are performing all these different roles, from peasant to emperor. And that's really challenging the class system. It's challenging a lot of kind of sort of settled ideas of societal niceties and manners with this idea of performance. So
it was just too popular. Polite society might frown on it, but it's just too popular. They can't fight it.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's seen as frivolous and worldly as opposed to spiritual and sacred. So
if you're going to do a play, then you do a mystery play or a miracle play.
Yes.
Kind of one of those shapes.
Yeah, and it's really interesting to see, how writers like Shakespeare and Christopher Marlowe take the morality play, which is starting to it still exists in the 15th and 16th century, and then it kind of disappears, but they take aspects of it and kind of bring it into their own drama. So we still have aspects of those older forms, just transformed. It's interesting to see, like in Dr. Faustus, you have the same kind of character types you would have in a morality play, but they become much more three-dimensional, much more kind of closer to our own sense of sort of psychological realism, much more vivid than the rather kind of stock characters that we get in the morality plays. But yeah, there's definitely a transformation. Slow. I mean, Shakespeare is probably still considered, when he goes back to Stratford, he buys the second best house in town. He's probably still considered a little bit, not sure about him, but boy, he's successful. He's really made good. So, kind of moving towards acceptability. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Yeah, do they ever give private performances?
You probably could buy out the Globe and have a private performance of a show. I'm sure that some charities or other groups have probably done that in the past. And there's actually two theaters. There's this theater, and then there's the smaller Sam Wanamaker. And the Sam Wanamaker, actually, they will, this theater, of course, uses artificial light. Sam Wanamaker will sometimes use candlelight. They have special permission to use candlelight. And that's a smaller theater, so I think that will be more likely to be kind of bought out for something. I keep wanting to go to the Sam Wanamaker because, it looks fabulous. It's beautiful to look at in the pictures I've seen, but I haven't had a chance yet. But yeah, so you can do private tours as well as group tours. When we did it, we just did a group tour, but it was really nice to kind of get up and intimate with the area, to really see some of the decorations. When you're sitting there, you don't see how richly decorated the stage is, the area of the galleries. Maybe not here so much, but as you get into some of the galleries here, like where we were, there's some beautiful paintings on the wall. You really see the love that has gone into this building. It's pretty extraordinary. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
One question goes back to something you said very early in your presentation. You said that the actors wore masks of some material, but there was also another group that sounded like they were doing the talking. So if they were wearing masks, could the actors really be understood?
That's it. Yeah. Now that's going to the ancient Greek theater. Yeah, not something we see in the Elizabethan theater. I wonder how they did it, because they were wearing masks, and they would wear them throughout, both the chorus and the individual performers. They must have had amazing skill in projection.
I imagine that they could project.
I imagine, I haven't had a chance to visit any of the Greek theaters, but I would imagine that they are, I think I've heard that acoustically they are also quite good, and that there's, again, kind of like the Globe, that there's like a few places you can stand that you can relatively easily project your voice and be heard. But yeah, I just imagine, kind of the performing challenges, because you have to use your body so much more with that mask on, and you would definitely have to use your voice. Now, the chorus would be performing a lot of the dialogue, and they would be repeating things, and they would be singing and dancing, so they would, because they would have the aid of instruments, they would have a group of people, you could kind of give voice to things more easily. But for the individual performers, say if you're playing Oedipus, that would be very difficult. They must have trained pretty rigorously to do that, because I know I've done Shakespeare in the Park, and that's a challenge. I did it in Portland, and we had like the trolley cars going by, and you had automobiles, you had people picnicking, you had dogs barking, and that was a huge challenge in itself, and I can't imagine one of those giant Greek amphitheaters. But yeah, hopefully lots of good sort of structure to help your voice project more fully. I apologize. We are at time. Yeah.
No, you're good.
Oh, thank you.
Give them a round of applause, Dr. Ward.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.